Hello and welcome to Tremaine's Sci-Fi Hour with Joda, Jag, and Tremaine. Now, Jag will be joining us midway through the program, but for now we have Joda. Joda, welcome. So,
Hello.
so our first topic is going to be writing outside of human normality. So, in terms of what is normal for people in fiction. So, for example, we assume since humans evolved in a certain way, they need to be done in a certain way. So Joda has some background in anthropology. So what do you think is going to be required for an alien species, in your opinion, to become intelligent?
Become intelligent.
Yeah,
I think it starts at the basis. We consider species to be intelligent on a few things, and one of them being tools.
right, right.
So they would need tools, some kind of way to communicate in some social structure, I would say.
So, so there's some so there's some stuff there that we can explore. So, social structure, for example, do you think it would be possible for a species to, well, obviously not, would there be a way of the social structure not existing and these independent creatures develop their own stuff?
As in, like, one person having a set
Well,
social structure, or in
say, say we say we have it so that the would you say so? Is it males? Males are the ones that provide that inject the Is that no? What? So let's say the injector, which is the someone that provides the non that doesn't carry the child to term,
right,
is independent from everything else and just simply finds a mate and then they never talk again, and then the recipient is carries the child to term and then the child develops on its own.
or well, that's assuming that the carrier would carry the child. There could be other ways of
Oh yeah, of course, yeah,
reproduction.
yeah,
Um,
like eggs.
eggs or spores or
Or fungi, which need 7 genders to work together to have a bubba.
Welcome, Jag. Okay. All right, Jag. We're talking about writing outside of human normality. So, what we've just explored is the idea of how different creatures could have evolved. Because obviously, as humans, we only have one form of intelligent life to judge things off of. So, what?
um, what do you mean one form of intelligent life?
Well, one form of life that can communicate and can do all the things that. No?
We have more than that. I would say almost all life is intelligent.
Dolphins, dogs.
Right, but
Apes, non-human apes.
they're not able to do most of the shit we can do, right? They can't.
Um,
mean,
th-
Can a dog bomb the planet into a new ice age? Lizzie, can you?
no, but they do have their own systems of social
Right,
structure
right,
and ways of communicating.
I've
So I
seen
wouldn't say they're
movies.
unintelligent.
right, right. So how would you describe what differs? Well, because obviously our societies are different, but also our prowess in terms of what's the word? What we can do is different from other species on our planet.
The only main difference is our ability to create.
Right. So would we say how would we if we were if we so even then we could say that aliens may not even be able to, well, what would you say, what they wouldn't be
It's
able to.
hard because we would, this is hard. Definitely we should lay down the the premise that we shouldn't. It's going to be hard not to project human ideals
Oh
and
yeah, of
ideology
course. Yeah, of
onto
course.
this stuff. But we are only going to be able to work within what we know, obviously.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when writing outside of human normality, they are creators are
Right.
attributing different species in like a lot of humanoid ways. Sometimes not, though.
Right.
You'll see in more of like the 80s, 90s aliens until you get to the actual Alien series. I would say more like Star Trek and Star Wars and such. There are a lot of humanoids
Right. Right. Yeah.
that have different either plant or other animal structures just mushed together into another
Yeah.
being.
Yeah. Like the
Um,
what's the ones with the forehead ridges in Star Trek? That's oh fuck.
Romulans?
No, no,
Or are they
no.
Klingons?
Klingons. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like
Hmm.
Klingons are basically humans with with what we would consider deformities, and Twi'leks in Star Wars are just humans with tentacles on their heads.
I think it is something that's changed more as time's gone on.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Like in my favorites, the Skylark series by Doc Smith.
Yeah.
Every alien is human, up till they travel to a different dimension.
Right. Right. Okay.
Um,
And so.
and they do
Oh,
similar stuff in Lensman, but they improved a little, and that would have been the 20s, 30s.
Jesus Christ. So there may have been some science in there that uh, that may not be entirely PC at the moment, but well, not at the moment at all. But what was I going to say? How would we? So, Jake, you've told me before about a story that was a story where aliens enlist humans to fight wars because we are the only species that is capable of committing crimes and or crimes like war.
Aggression.
Yeah. So
Oh gosh, I can't remember what that one was. I thought you might have me jump to
Aggression. I would say
Blindsight
aggression as in
by
like aggression
Watts.
with intent,
right.
beyond like surviving.
Yeah. So we a dog. Well, maybe it would actually. I don't know. But so say there's a species that yeah, for example, only does things for survival, but we also can do things like killing for. Well, what's some examples of that, Jodo? Like, what's some examples of killing for other reasons than survival?
Well, that's a hard one because dolphins have been seen to kill for pleasure. Also, like wild hyenas,
Right.
there's been a lot of um, I don't know, maybe currency, but
So currency, you could argue for survival, but also you could also say, well, you have other options as well. I suppose is the idea, right?
yeah, I don't know if we should be trying to label what intelligent life form is, rather than what would be considered outside of. I don't
Well,
know,
already
because
there you're working within the paradigm. Because as I
Yeah.
say, like in Blindsight by Peter Watts, the aliens are not conscious. They're not intelligent. Using energy, using your
right,
adenosine
yeah.
triphosphate reserves for consciousness is a massive waste.
Right.
So
Yeah.
thinking it's a writing outside of human normality is hard because we exist within human normality.
Right. But it requires.
Um,
Yeah. Sorry.
a good this is gonna be a good reference that is not a reference, but a good example of people brainstorming this is the series called Face Off,
Right.
where it's sci-fi artists like trying to break the box, but by using human models. So it's really interesting to see that kind of dynamic going on.
Right.
Um,
Right.
To be
but
fair, these ideas do predate sci-fi because a lot of Fey legends and stuff,
So what's a
they always
fey?
had
Sorry. What's
blue
a
and
fey?
orange
What's a fey
morality.
legend?
right,
Just quickly.
Like European fairies
Oh yeah,
where
yeah, yeah, yeah.
they they're actually inhuman,
Right.
so they don't see good, evil, anything like that. They just run on different rules entirely.
So something I just to change subject slightly, something I've wondered is, could there be a planet where there's no competition, so therefore there's no need for war? You know how like New Zealand prior to the arrival of humans had very little predators on it, almost none, except for I think the Haast eagle and some others. And so would these creatures develop intel? Is competition necessary for intelligence? Sorry, sorry. Is competition necessary for the development of civilization, or a more complex social structure, or is that just purely in our heads?
It it is as we know it.
Right.
Like
Right.
we
The
could
theory of
definitely
natural selection and
see
then
Yeah.
otherwise, but
sorry,
yeah, natural selection does essentially
is based
require
on
competition.
right. The theories that we know we don't exist without competition, nor does a lot of species on Earth,
Right.
especially after invasive species have been introduced.
Right.
Um, the theory of evolution and natural selection is based on competition. So if you take out competition, it's interesting to think about, would species still evolve or even change in ways as we know it, because evolution might not exist outside of Earth.
We
Right.
have
And
kind of seen that here though, like sharks basically don't have competition. They have not changed. They're still in their niche.
Well, there's
So
always going to
we've
be
stagnated.
competition in within species too, with mating.
right, yeah, that's what I was going to bring up is mating. So would they develop more beautiful or more perceptively beautiful features like New Zealand birds, for example? Not
Subjectively, yes, they
yeah,
would.
are going to develop. They developed more colors. They developed more beautiful mating calls and things like that to as competition. So
They made their own competition
yeah,
with each
exactly.
other.
But then again, that's human thinking as well. That this idea that we have to compete. There could be this thing where your genetic material, you don't care if someone else has kids with your, like a sort of cuckold thing.
Right. Well, competition within mating stems from competition for survival because they want their children to have the most successful outcome for survival,
Right, right,
whatever species that we're speaking of. So, if per se there were or a world where that didn't matter,
right.
it's interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, so it's this idea that I think aliens that are in that environment perhaps would have more would be more prepped for a advanced society than maybe we are, because there's that old thinking of, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we developed atomic bombs before we developed atomic energy.
Yeah, yeah.
So we developed something to annihilate entire cities before we did something that could power the world
But
very
it's also
effectively.
easier.
Oh,
Is
okay,
that
okay, that's fair enough.
competition for success or just competition for power, though? Or I mean, for survival, or is that just competition for power?
Well, you could argue,
We're bringing in a lot of
yeah, yeah, yeah,
a lot of other societal
and
things here.
this is a good example of that exactly. So
It's still
we
in-group, out-group
we
competition, yeah.
yeah we could think like, well, were the allies worried, and not to get too much into history, but were the allies worried for their own survival? I would argue yes, but I would argue also at the time they deployed the bombs, they were doing it to intimidate the Soviet Union, which would also be a form of competition. They knew that there was going to be conflict with the Soviets after the war, so there's this element of competition and this element of trying to stave off another war potentially.
Well, and then I feel like we're about to get into
Yeah, don't worry. We'll
an
just
offshoot.
yeah,
But my point to that being, we can't isolate it, like look at it as isolation. What am I trying to say? We can't look at the isolated aspect of them thinking that they're trying to survive. We have to look at why.
right, yeah,
And a lot of stuff that goes on in human social structure is based in a lot of history of people exploiting others. So I think that um like there's a lot of power struggles where people are like, oh, they were trying to survive when they're actually just trying to survive within their own societal structure,
right.
which was created off the backs of others. So I think that when we're writing outside of human normality, it's hard because a lot of those themes are placed in that writing,
Right, and it's almost
which you've seen in like Star Wars and even more recent stuff with any of the Marvel franchise. If you just watch, I just recently watched Captain Marvel again, and that was about imperialism and people taking over other worlds, leaving refugees behind. Like, it's hard to, as humans, it's going to be hard to write outside of human normality
right,
without
of course.
injecting themes and that we see throughout human history in it.
And that's part of the writing process is trying in sci-fi and in fantasy is trying to see explore these different areas that could possibly be explored because it's, as we said, it's an endless opportunity, an endless well of ideas and new concepts. But yeah, so I suppose that's very interesting, and I certainly think, Jag, is there any other examples of like trying to think outside of normality in fiction that you can come
Oh,
up with?
classic Ender's Game.
Right.
Um,
And what's the sort of difference there?
so less so much Ender's Game itself, which has the buggers, the evil bug species,
Right.
which the main like plot point of that, hope I'm not ruining it for anyone, is
Spoilers, and
well, the spoilers for Ender's Game. It's an old one.
how old was it?
Um, oh, I don't even want to know. It was. I mean, some people might be new to it because of the movie,
Right, yeah.
which is only a decade old, but the book, yeah, but a little bit older. I'll pull that up while I continue. So in that the main plot point is that the aliens wiped out a human advance force because they assumed they were all soldiers, which are, if you're a bug, irrelevant.
Right.
And then later in communications, they realized that every human is essentially a queen in their culture, and is like, oh, we just genocided, didn't we? Whoops. But I was thinking more the sequel Xenocide, which has very aliens. A a life path that passes through being a tree. They're the Pequininos, I
Right.
believe.
So and so just some final thoughts on that topic before we switch off. Um, Writing outside of human normality is obviously, as I said, an endless well of possibilities. But perhaps is it as entertaining as we think it would be for a general audience?
I definitely liked stuff like the Weir tetralogy and Blindsight and all
Yeah, but
that.
you are weird, so
I am a neophyte, so the ideas of these
yeah,
cutting edge as opposed to that nasty scabby bit towards the edge
right,
is quite my scene, yeah.
yeah. But if we were
Personally, I don't think it's for a general audience
right,
because sci-fi is usually a way of talking about stuff that is human
mm,
and
Right.
just contextualizing it into a space where you are allowed to explore things that, maybe you talk a bit about genocide that obviously has very tough emotional things that you can't really get around. But if it's aliens,
Yeah, yeah, I see your point.
then you're allowed to play with these ideas. So I think sci-fi generally shouldn't be too far outside the human norm because it becomes less relatable
Right.
and
Right.
it's
And I think
self-defeating in
that
a way.
sci-fi itself as a genre is very critical of happenings
Right, right.
in the world, and I think that it should stay that way, especially, and it's interesting to see it across different cultures, which we're going to get to later, but um there's always that aspect of activism, I would say,
Right.
whether you're for it or against it in sci-fi. And I think if you get too outside of human normality, it stops, like Jag said, being a little relatable to
Right.
things that we do needed to discuss in
Yeah.
current times.
And so, just in that same vein, but as a sort of segue, AI. Now, artificial intelligence is obviously something that we don't have full understanding over. But if we think about what we see AI in a lot of fiction, especially in movies, um, we see them as something that would ultimately destroy us or would not serve us well. Do you think that's also to do with thinking along human normality lines?
I think it's less human normality lines and more the standard elements of storytelling.
Right.
You need
Conflict.
conflict, you
Yeah.
need resolution. That if you have AI, what role are you going to assign it
Right. So,
Right, and
in
we've
a
seen it. We've
storytelling
seen it
sense?
in a few ways in sci-fi. I would
true.
say for good and for bad. I will come out and say that I am an American, so I'm very cynical about anything being in the hands of the American government. Um,
Yeah.
so uh, anything that could be weaponized, I'm weary of.
Right. Right.
Especially because we're known. We see, of course, throughout history again, anything that can be weaponized will be used, or at least used as a threat. Um, but I think that AI in general is not evil or um, good. It's used for the function that it's programmed to be used for.
Well, that's. Oh,
Until we get to the conversation of it being
beyond us.
sentient.
Yeah, sentient. Yeah, yeah, of course. Which then brings up the question of would that sentience be would it have to be human almost? Would it have to be a would it have to almost grow up in our way in our because the brain obviously develops as we grow up. So what would happen if the brain starts off as an adult brain? If you see what I mean?
So, for a positive example of AI where that does happen, Bicentennial Man, Robin Williams.
Right? What's
They
that?
get a fully functional robot. It's a nice robot, very helpful. As I say, played by Robin Williams, and it slowly
R.I.P.
gains more sentience. Sometimes there's little upgrades to him which help his capacity. It's based on, of course, Isaac Asimov's The Positronic Man,
Right, right,
but it it does cover like what if you start with something quite developed and then it obtains sentience as opposed to what you said sounds more like the neural learning stuff where you start with nothing and build it up
right,
with an intention from the get go.
right. And so, if what sorry. What we also may discover as we go along is intelligence and emotion may actually be a lot more. Well, sorry, I'm saying that as if it might not already be the case, but in my view, we may discover that intelligence and emotions may be a lot more interlocked than we think. Could be a possibility that the ability, because originally I know that this was the case in a lot of horror and thrillers as well. Just to go a little off topic, is this idea that psychopaths were a lot more effective because they didn't have the problem of being what do you call it? Being stopped by
Empathetic.
anything. Yeah, exactly. But now I think Jada, you'll be able to add to this as well. Is this idea that that they aren't actually as effective as we think they are, and they often aren't very successful in life. A lot of them are very
Um, it depends.
right.
High functioning psychopaths can hold jobs, have families, can usually have fronts very well. Um, or mask, I would say, is the
Yeah,
term that
yeah.
people are using. Um, it there's a certain classifications, I would say, psychologically, where not all serial killers are psychopaths.
Right, right.
Um, and I think the word psychopath is thrown out a lot um, when some people have been diagnosed with psychopathy and aren't serial killers. So a lot of CEOs, and for example, have either exhibited or diagnosed psychopathy or sociopaths. Um, as for AI and emotions versus, I think are you trying to say like intelligence and like the sentient aspect?
Yes, I would say that would
Okay.
be part of
So
what
I
I think.
think that in a lot of things that I've seen where AI, um, that's what's lacking. What is technically making them not sentient is their lack of emotion. And then once they start to feel emotion, everyone in the series or movie or writing is like, oh, they're sentient now. So it usually involves them crying or feeling upset about
Right,
something.
right. Yeah.
Um, and that I think is the trigger. I think that you're onto something there with emotion, not necessarily like intelligence. Because we've seen that AI and a lot of things can pull from pretty much the entire internet. Um,
Right, yeah. But that knowledge without wisdom, would you say, is not that useful, is it? Because if that requires someone to be that requires someone with wisdom or with intention to use you.
I would say intent is the right thing there because
Yeah.
intent can be programmed, but I think intent included with emotion is or no, now we're getting into free will.
That's fine, that's fine.
Um, because I guess the intent can be programmed because an AI can know what they, in like most cases, know what their purpose is
Right.
and like why they're there. Um, so they would have intent in that aspect, but I would say self like made intent would
Right.
be
Yeah.
more of an accurate
Would be
depiction
yeah,
of
I see what you mean.
sentient.
Yeah, yeah.
So it has to be, or it doesn't have to be, but as an emergent phenomena.
Right, right, right.
Right.
And that's, I mean, that's, yeah, it's a very good point that you make that that what do you call it? My thought just went out of my head again.
Good,
um
good.
but yeah, it's, and then so moving on to real life and thinking about what what exactly we get from current AI. So obviously there's that really cute chubby robot that's in Japan. That, what's it called? Asimo.
Ah, yep, Asimo.
He was on QI. Or she or he was on, or it was on QI. I don't know.
Named after Asimov, of course.
Well, yeah, he's sort of Asimov's sort of the guy, right? He's sort of the, he's not the grandfather of sci-fi, but he's sort of definitely a master of sci-fi.
Sorry, they claim it stands for Advanced Step in Innovative Mobility.
Yeah, but
Oh, no, it's named after Asimov,
yeah,
yep.
it's a bunch of nerds. It's a bunch of nerds in a lab. Of course, it's named after Asimov.
Now, to be fair, when you say, like, your reference is something older than you, so that's a bit weird for modern. Asimov was finalized in the year 2000.
Right, right. And I am the youngest here because, you know. but
That's
but
exactly, child.
but I shut up. But but that's one of the only things I can think of at the moment. But what else is there in real life that is that sort of intelligent, on the verge of becoming something a bit more than we
So, I mean,
used to?
Asimo's not remotely intelligent. He's pretty much remote control.
Right, right.
I have some
Are you
experience with
thinking
AI
more?
as well.
Oh yeah.
Are you thinking
So
more like Big Dog? The American killer robot.
oh my god.
Yeah, that's part of my experience is
Right. So Jonah, tell us.
the
Boston
U.S.
Dynamics.
military.
Boston Dynamics. They have some AI in them. Yeah.
Right. So Jonah,
Yeah.
what's your experience with this killer dog?
Well, I would just say that the U.S. military does use a lot of AI in their killing machines, including drones and like self-driving drones and stuff.
Right,
Um,
right.
what I have experience in is I work in the energy industry, and we see a lot of AI used in power plants to create
Right.
self-sustaining power plants and microgrids, and it's pretty much used to eliminate error,
Right.
um,
Okay.
and is often looked down upon. There are a lot of ideas about AI, especially in um, nuclear energy, especially because, well, only because nuclear energy has its own stigma attached to it because of,
Right.
we all know why. So,
Fukushima.
adding
Yeah.
adding unforeseen
Chernobyl. 3 minutes
or
Chernobyl.
ago.
Oh, sorry, Chernobyl.
things
Yeah.
that we don't know about AI, a lot of people don't know about AI or and what it can be used for. They just have seen movies. So
Right. Like me.
adding AI that is seen as problematic because of the movies and adding it to nuclear energy, which is problematic because of Chernobyl and the movies, even though oil refineries and um,
Coal.
there's a lot
Coal
more
power
issues with
plants. Yeah.
whole like oil power plants, oil refineries exploding, being on fire, and
Yeah.
it's never publicized because it's too much money. Um,
And of course, for
so
example, the Fukushima meltdown, the deaths and negative health effects from that one event is about on par with 10 years of running a coal power plant at optimum efficiency, just from the soot and everything in the air.
right, and
Right.
that's a
Yeah.
single coal power plant, but there's
Yeah.
usually dozens of them in the area.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I
So
see
it's
what
not
you're
as
saying.
bad as a year of running coal.
Yeah.
right.
So,
Um,
but we don't. Have,
but AI can be useful in and is useful in um, creating sustainable or running sustainable energy, as with wind power plants and or wind plants and solar plants, helps run those without having to deal with again human error. Um,
and then a
which
word from our sponsor, the Koch brothers. Yeah. Yeah. I see what you mean. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
so I
Okay.
think it's useful in aspects if the intent behind it is there. Um, so whoever is in the hands and is programming it, or whoever is paying for however it's going to be used, that pretty much determines the good or badness of
Right.
AI.
Right. Yeah.
Now, I am
Once it
curious
becomes sentient,
in many
would it
ways.
rely on that coding, that previous coding, or would it just completely deny it?
Right. Yeah.
Well, and that's where my question comes in, which is you mentioned AI being used in this context. Is this AI as in just heavily nested if then or and if else statements, or is it neural net stuff? Or is it
Um,
even the more sci-fi sort of like in the Weir tetralogy where
Well, we may not know that
errors are
because
put in on purpose and then are done evolutionarily?
well, we
Does
may not know
evolutionary
that
uh,
because the U.S. military is very good at keeping things a secret.
yes. As for
true?
the military stuff, I can't speak on because I'm not in the military and I don't know it. And they're very hush hush about stuff like that. Um, but for the energy sector, it is not anything close to what would be in sci-fi movies.
Right.
It's
So
pretty
it's
much
not going
used
to
for
be a Skynet.
cybersecurity and operations.
It's not Skynet. It's just
Right.
yeah. It's just a program that
It's just keeping the facility from overpowering,
exploding.
shutting down, being
Exploding.
yeah,
Just as I say, a lot of
running run it
mutated
keeps the facility
things
running at optimum
and fails.
efficiency.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's yeah. Okay. I can
And so
understand.
why is that AI? That's just following orders
Right.
sequentially, essentially.
That's okay. That's a point. Yeah. That's so.
Is that
Th-
intelligence?
so maybe there needs to be. Is there subcategories of AI then?
There
Oh
there
yeah.
definitely is.
So there could be a more advanced. Jag, we may be thinking about more advanced AI, whereas Joda's talking about more intermediate or basic AI, which is able to do tasks, which we have to admit is a form of intelligence. Being able
That
to
would fit under reactive AI, which
right,
is
yeah,
it gets an input, it runs some operations, it gives an output. And
right,
nothing about the AI changes. You could read at the works of Shakespeare, they'll give you something back. It's not affected by it. So
right,
that's reactive. And so that is what you'd expect on like oil fields or in your car if you've got a fancy one. Like a Tesla would be reactive AI.
right, right.
But that is the bottom of the four
Yeah,
stages or
yeah,
types of AI. Because up from that, you get ones that can improve when fed data, essentially.
right.
Uh,
Like humans.
ones,
Yeah,
yeah. Up from that, you get theory of mind. So you have it will consider what others think and what others know,
right,
and then above that is just human equivalent.
right. Okay,
We're, we're very lazy with
yeah.
where we delineate.
Well, some of the best ways to do things is the lazy way. All right, so moving on. Now, I mentioned the Terminator and I
Mm.
mentioned Skynet just briefly. Um, and that sort of revival of sort of this is not necessarily just sci-fi. This is across the movie and fiction world, and it happens a lot, especially with American films. Is this idea of reviving things from the past? So, like a good example of this is in Star Wars recently in the Book of Boba Fett. Obviously, Boba Fett was brought back. In the Clone Wars, Darth Maul was brought back to life. There's been numerous examples of this in different genres. There's prequels, sequels, there's spin-offs, there's all sorts of things that are based off of that. And I wonder if it's hurting sci-fi in that way, if you know what I mean.
So are you talking both revival in like the reboot
Well, yeah. So
and sidequel sort of thing, but
and
also
yeah,
like its connection to literally bringing back characters?
yeah. So both. It's both. So this idea that we can't let a series from the past just be in the past. We have to remake it, and we can't.
Right.
We can't just make something new. We have to have the same thing. It's like so, it's like how arguably the Star Wars universe, because that's obviously my favorite. It didn't necessarily need to go on after episode 6. The prequels, I'll give you, okay, maybe that was okay, sure, maybe that needed to be there, but it's not, again, it wasn't wholly necessary, even though I love it. But this idea that everything needs to have a sequel, or everything needs to be brought back in a new way, like The Lion King, or
Yeah.
that like
I would say
mm,
about 85% of the time it hurts the storyline.
right, right, because of yeah, sorry,
Even I would say as high as 90% of the time. It's
yeah,
only done because there's a demand for it.
right, and that
Um,
yeah,
and people are, and when there's going to be demand, and then people will be like, I want a series and or another series of this, and then we'll be mad that it's bad when the
yeah,
series had already finished their storyline,
yeah,
which I never understand. Some of
People
the best.
people do some very silly things, don't they? You know
And people
that.
always reference the Saw movies or Halloween movies. It happens a lot in horror
Yeah,
because there's not a lot of good original horror content anymore. And I think a lot of times horror and sci-fi bleed into each other.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so people are just running out of ideas, I think, at this point, and they think, oh, this was popular at one time, so there's a demand for it somewhere, so let's make another one, and then they just kind of throw out the storyline. It happens in sci-fi video games as well, like Halo.
Right. So my question
Um,
is, are people
yeah.
running out of ideas, or on this flip side, is it a lack of ideas in the places? Is it a fear of taking on the risk of doing something new?
Studios are definitely risk averse. There's
Yeah,
more
Yes.
new stories out there ready to be
yeah.
put into an appropriate um,
Movie, TV
format.
show, or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
I would say that
Then
it
there
happens
is
a lot more in writing.
movies.
People start with new stories
And I
and books
think,
and and
yeah.
yeah.
So they're obviously risk averse because there's money riding on it now. I mean, how
Yeah.
much does a movie cost? $200 million, $1 billion? It's madness. So they're not willing to take those chances, and they look at what do people like. And I'll say at the moment, but it is a number of decades now where toxic nostalgia.
Right, right,
It's people looking back at stuff and being that was so great, and it's ruining things. It's killing things because we go, oh, should we reboot this? And it's like, no, it was good the first time, and the old one still exists. You can
yeah,
still watch it. Why not either make something new or reboot something that was bad and had potential?
right, right. Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so this
But
is,
no
and
one has nostalgia for the movies that had terrible visual effects, and it's like, but
yeah.
you could do it with
So
good
like,
now, and it would be amazing.
oh, what was that? Jim Henson. Was it Jim Henson?
He did all the Muppets. He did
The
Dark
Dark
Crystal.
Crystal. That's it. Wasn't that
Yep.
really unpopular because of the thing? And now they've remade it in a with better special effects, and it's super popular. That's a good example of that. Something of a story having good potential and good ideas, but just was limited by technology. Yeah,
Which is interesting because it was a lot of physical effects. I mean,
right.
he was the puppeteer.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
amazing.
Of course.
Um,
Yeah, but then you have other movies like I wouldn't say the remake of Predator or the Alien movies did it them any justice.
No. But they were also good when they came out, right?
Yeah.
Actually, I don't know. Yeah.
So
they
So
were
why
good
remake
still.
them?
yeah, exactly. That's what that's what Jake's saying
Yeah.
is this idea that
Mm.
we need to keep remaking and redoing everything is just stupid. I mean, it's
Yeah.
and then
That's
also
like I said, it ruins the
yeah,
story
yeah,
90% of the time.
and I mean also there's also the element of not to get political at all, but is this idea that people say, oh, they're ruining it because they've added these well they've added these new aspects to it. Maybe like the Ghostbusters, for example. People said it was ruined because they made the Ghostbusters women. It's not ruined because of that. It's ruined because it was already fine. It didn't need a new. It didn't need to be rebooted. And that's what I would
My
say is a
my
lot of
issue was the
this.
chemistry between characters. It was a writing issue more than anything.
Right, but it
And
also
also,
yeah,
some storylines can use that because of representation purposes. Like it's nice if they do a good job at it,
right.
but a lot of and most of the time they don't do a good job. They're
No,
just making it for the sake of that representation.
yeah, they're just doing it to get those brownie points.
It's tokenism, yeah.
When in reality, what you really need is a story where well, that also comes down to we need people who are representative of that in the writing room as well, because
Right.
they have
Yeah.
elements of how things need to be done. Sorry, Jag, you're the white man and you're getting it. No, no. So
I
Jag's,
mean, to
yeah,
to bring it back to Alien,
yeah,
the lead character being a female, um, that wasn't in the script. There was just nothing precluding it being a female. And
right,
when it came up as an option, they went,
yeah,
well, she'd be really good at it.
yeah.
and it fits either way. So there was a like you can't look at Alien and be like female lead tokenism.
Right.
But the only real difference most of the time is, did it work?
Yeah.
Was it liked? Amazing representation. Was it liked? No. Tokenism. That's the only reason they had a
Right.
Native American person in there. And it's like, well, it fitted the character. It just
Yeah.
wasn't a
So
good
there's
movie.
more nuance to it than what the
Yeah,
internet gives.
there definitely is a lot of nuance to it, and I think that you're right about it. It doesn't. It's not only the writing room too. It's production,
Right.
casting. Like it's all of it needs to be people have
Direction.
representation there. And if it's like a movie where it's just representation in the cast and the rest of them are just white men, and it's not going to work, and it never does.
No.
I would say
See, if I
cishet white
write
men
a
for
good
sure.
female, yeah, if I was to write a good female character, it would be because I've written a good character who's like any other good character, and this one is lady.
Yeah.
No,
So
I don't think that's right. I
That's the
think that
only.
there's a lot of nuance to like including those aspects of identity
Mm.
right.
But if I
and the
tried to, I'd
character
fail.
and characters written for those aspects of identity are so intricately woven into real people that when you I had someone tell me the other day that Captain Marvel they didn't really like the movie because it was a lot of heavy this is because I'm a woman thing, but at the same time for the time period it was in and also the lack of that throughout history that needs to be woven into the character. Like it's
Right.
not
Yeah.
just a good character and then
So
bam, she's a woman.
so
I would
what you're
say
We
also
have
saying
that
is for example, if a woman is say we have a war story, because traditionally war was fought with majority male armies, a woman in an naturally would need to be a bit more aggressive and a bit more in your face because that's the environment she would have had to be brought up in, right? Is that what you're saying?
I was no,
mm,
yes and no. It's more so um like they were mad that it got pointed out the way that it did,
Right.
it just
even
needs to be
though
justified.
even
That's
though
me.
in that time period, like you said, women weren't usually
Yeah.
fighting wars.
Yeah.
So it needed to be addressed. Like people couldn't just say, "Oh, why is she able to fight?" When it would, in order to be historically accurate, it needed to be addressed. But
Right.
also, that's an aspect of her identity, and it needed to be intricately woven as with if it's part of the storyline, sexuality. If it's not part of the storyline, why does that matter? So, like, you can tell when it's being pushed and when it's not
Right.
the way that it's woven into the
But it
character
also,
design.
I suppose, it also comes down to um, you don't notice these things if you're enjoying if you're enjoying the movie. So I think also, sorry, there are people who obviously are just
Or
looking
if you
for.
go in prejudiced.
Yeah, there are
Right.
obviously
It's
people.
definitely prejudice.
There's also there are people who just go into movies to be little bitches about it. But I say for the majority of the audience, if the thing is written well, you don't notice it. This is something that actually Terrible Writing Advice, who does amazing work on YouTube, he talks about this. If you're knocked out of the storyline by something, that's when you start to notice the components of the story. You're no longer looking at it's sort of like a merry-go-round. You're no longer looking at the pretty painted horses. You're looking at gears and cogs and things moving, and that's when you're getting knocked out of the story. And that's maybe where some of the more general audiences are getting a bit knocked out by this thing. So maybe it can also there's also a writing element that is not being considered as well.
And I think it's also if they do remakes and they change something, like for instance, since we were talking about Ghostbusters, since they
Yeah.
changed the cast from man to woman, people went in knowing that difference.
Right. Yeah.
If you're creating new content and there's representation within that
Yeah.
content,
That's a good point.
you're right,
Yeah.
it's gonna knock you out of the storyline if it's not well written. But when you're making remakes, people are gonna notice the differences because they've seen,
Yeah.
especially cult following
Yeah.
people.
Like especially, and as much as I hate to admit it, there is a in a lot of nerd and geek culture, there is a element of that prejudicial thing because of what for whatever reason there is that element of it.
Yeah, and I would say it's just because of the generalized misogynism that's
Right.
in a
Yeah.
lot of places, and misogynism along with racism
Right.
and
All sorts of
homophobia.
all sorts of
Yeah,
isms. Yeah.
all the isms and phobias is there's a generalized aspect of that in a lot of white or male dominated um
Right.
groups of people, nerds, geeks, like Comic-Con, especially, and that's stemming from works being mostly white male dominated,
Which
so, and
also
like throughout history.
which also brings us to our backup topic because we have, I think, 12 minutes. Um, so
I
imperialism.
believe we're due for an ad break. Who's it today? Lockheed Martin. All right.
The
Oh
Koch brother.
no, not Lockheed Martin.
Oh my god. Do you know what though? It's just I have this image in my head of like who was it? Is this idea of this radio show going like, can you believe anyone would drive a Kia? All right, our sponsors. You know what I just said? I think it was really unfair. And it's
Um,
thank you very much for listening or watching or whatever the hell I end up doing with this. Um, remember to give us a good review if you enjoyed, and if you didn't, please don't leave anything, or just comment on how we can do better. Go check out TremaineArchyWriter.com for some exclusive articles and things like that we will also be featuring the podcast there. And don't forget to check out the Instagram and Facebook page for the writing groups. And that's been us. Thank you, Jodar and Jag, and we'll see you next time.
thank you.
If you want, you can find me at my house. Leave the forbidden at the door.
That's good. That's staying in. That's staying in.